welcome on the first Saturday of every month. We have Seb Barnett here to lead us in a discussion, or actually present some topics on shamanism. So we're going to welcome Seb to the stage for the next 45 minutes. Come on up, Seb.
This microphone is for a tall person. All right, that's a little bit better. All right, so as previously stated, I'm Seb. I own and run Green Stag Spirit Work, which is a local shamanism business in King County. And coming up here first Saturday of every month at Soul Food Books to do a different topic on shamanism every month. So if you enjoy it this month, you should come back again for another month. Today I'm going to be talking about ancestor worship, or reverence of ancestors in shamanism, and how it's still applicable and how it's still practiced in many different cultures all over the world, and how it was practiced with shamanism and is still practiced with shamanism. I keep referring to practicing shaman in past tense because it has such an amazing historical context, but at the same time it's still very practiced today in very many places. So ancestor worship, or reverence of ancestors, shows up in many cultures all over the world. Many shamanic practices have ancestor worships as part of their culture. And from culture to culture, that can look very different. Even in the United States today, we still revere our ancestors by leaving them flowers, by tending their graves on Memorial Day, things along those lines. We don't think of it as reverence of the ancestors all the time, but it is still very much reverence of the ancestors. We also a lot of times have prized possessions passed down from people who have passed on in our families, and we take care very deeply for them and take care of those objects, and that's another way that we still revere ancestors. Many cultures around the world revere ancestors and have revered them in the past. My information is I'm just skimming the surface when it comes to all these different cultures and ancestor worship and shamanism. And ancestor worship is applied to a lot of different traditions and is used in many different ways. In Africa, many cultures engage the ancestors to talk between them and their deities or the spirits around them. It makes a lot of sense because the ancestors, they remember what it's like to be human. They know what human beings need, and they can reach out to the deities because they are spirits and speak to the deities in a way that they can understand more easily. A lot of times, even people who are practicing Christianity or Muslim traditions in Africa are also still engaging their ancestors to talk to the deities to look out for their own good. In Madagascar, ancestor worship is very active and involves rituals that involve exhuming the bodies of the deceased every now and then to rewrap them with clean new shrouds. And if there's a bottle of alcohol opened, always the first sip of alcohol goes to their ancestors. They also have traditions that misfortunes are caused by the ancestors who have been ignored. In ancient Egypt, they believed that their ancestors looked out for the good of the descendants and gave them food and drink as offerings. In China, there's a very long tradition of ancestor worship. Sometimes an altar in the home is dedicated to ancestors, or offerings at temples, or offerings left at graves. They worship their ancestors with food, drink, paper objects which are burned to send them to the spirit world and to the ancestors. This is partly done simply to honor the ancestor, but for to honor the ancestor as someone who put so much time, energy, and effort into making sure that their descendants were going to be good. The ancestors also provide them with good luck, protection, and little favors are asked of them. Some Japanese continue ancestor worship with holidays, celebrating and feeding the ancestors, but people practice ancestor worship less today in Japan than in the past. It used to be a very alive tradition, and it's has less and less people practicing on a regular basis in Japan, from what I hear. I haven't been to Japan. In Korea, they have different ancestor honoring ceremonies at different times of year. They have days of the year that are specifically for honoring the ancestors, but also when they keep track of when each ancestor passed away, and they honor the anniversary of their death. Both Buddhists and Catholics practice ancestor worship in Korea. Also, they are offering the food and all these things in Korea to the ancestors, but also to help give them energy to help them get to the afterlife. That's part of their traditions. In Vietnam, ancestor worship is very common, with altars to ancestors in the home with regular offerings and special ceremonies for ancestors on their death anniversary also. In ancient Celtic cultures, there were days specifically to honor the dead, that they believed that the dead came and wandered the world, and they would put out candles to help guide the dead, and also so that the dead would be able to find their way in a dark, dark world at that point. They would also leave offerings of food to let the ancestors know that they were still loved and cared for. And also to the ancestors who didn't always have the best intentions for them, to say like, hey guys, here's some food, you can have that, please don't bother us. Ancient Germanic cultures, they also had holidays to honor their ancestors. I had a hard time finding out any information about that, though. Many of you are probably familiar with the Day of the Dead, which happens in Mexico, Brazil, and Spain. And they practice it really intensely. Like, it's just beautiful with parades and floats, and they have altars built up and flowers and food and offerings of drinks and even objects. And they do that so that the ancestors will protect them and will give them good luck and wisdom. One of the things we have to consider right away when we're talking about just about anything is, what does the term mean? So I'd like to clarify. Ancestors are people who have human beings who have passed away, who are either of your, that you're a descendant of in some way or shape. There's the beloved dead, and the beloved dead or recent dead are people that you knew who passed away. Like, say, a grandmother or a grandfather or a great aunt or great uncle, and they are one of your ancestors. These ancestors are, in a lot of ways, less spiritually powerful than others because they're more recently dead, but also they are the ones who can help you out a lot in situations because they actually know you in person, and they also know your family members and may have really good ways of helping you relate to your family members or work with them. The greater dead are ancestors who are in your more distant past that you might be less related to. And they are individuals who are heroic, they did really awesome deeds, or they were beautiful musicians or artists, and they're almost more historical figures, but they're part of your ancestry, so they are people that you can contact and that will probably help you out. Also, in the greater dead category are people who have done the same sort of thing that you are doing now. So let's say that you are doing metal work or silver work. You could contact ancestors who have had the same profession, and they would help you out. Music is an excellent way of relating to ancestors and asking them for advice in ways that you can develop your music, develop different techniques. Maybe they can help you find out new ways of practicing music, or any other profession that you may be practicing. In many cultures, ancestors are the communicators between the people who are still alive and the spirits who are out and about in the world, whether those be spirits of nature, deities and gods and goddesses, or even other spirits of the dead. And in this way, it makes a lot of sense, because if your ancestors will remember being human, and a lot of times they will remember you also. And they are looking out for your best interests, and they are still also spirits, which means that they can relate to other spirits, nature spirits, deities, things along those lines. But they also understand very well the human needs that each person has, and the human needs that you might be requesting about. There's a lot of different spirits out there who may not care if you have a good income coming in or not. They probably won't even understand the idea behind income, or that you need to buy food as opposed to just get it or gather it. And ancestors can be a really great person to talk to those spirits and be like, well, this is actually why. And they have a better way of explaining it, because they're talking to spirits as spirits. Ancestors can also help out with just you having good fortune, good luck in life, having good relationships with the people around you. I think that ancestors are probably the best people to go to, especially the beloved dead, the recent dead. They're the best people to go to if you're having family problems and asking them for ideas, being like, oh my God, my mom is kind of driving me crazy and I don't know what to do. This always happens every Thanksgiving. And her grandmother, your great-grandma, who's passed away, might be the perfect person to contact and ask that spirit, how on earth do I get my mom to calm down around Thanksgiving? Things along those lines that are very simple and practical are also very useful and help us have a much more peaceful and productive life. It might be in your past that you have some really good businessmen and women who are your ancestors, and they can help you out with ideas financially, or ideas of how to interact with coworkers in the workplace that can much improve your relationships at work. They can have really good ideas of having good boundaries with other people around you, and they're really excellent for providing wisdom and good insights just throughout your life. If you're interacting with the greater dead or heroic dead, who are your ancestors, those individuals can be really good at teaching you things about protecting yourself, the traditions in your own lineage, and they can give you really good ideas and insights around protecting yourself from other spirits. They tend to be very powerful because, especially if there's someone who is well known or revered or a historical figure, because all that people talking about them and thinking about them and telling stories about them feeds their spirits. So they become really strong and powerful allies when it comes to working with spirits and even working with people in our everyday lives. They're also really good at helping you with things that might be in your genetic disposition. So maybe there's a lot of people in your family who are very accident prone, and you're trying to get away from that genetic disposition of being accident prone. And your ancestors can be really helpful for helping you figure out, like, where does that accident prone where do those accident prone tendencies come from, and what can you personally do, things along those lines. They can be really good at imparting wisdom to us, because even if we don't know that great Uncle Ed had the same sort of disposition that, like, say, I do now, I can contact great Uncle Ed and find out that he was a lot like me when he was my age, and I can find out what he did wrong, and he can give me advice on what kind of situations to avoid. Things like that can be really helpful for everyone. It is also really good to clarify, when you're going to work with ancestors, what kind of ancestors you're going to work with. It's especially for the recent dead. If you just call out to your ancestors who are recently dead from, like, the past, let's say, 4 or 5 generations, there might be some individuals that you don't know there, and some of them are a little farther removed, and some of them may not be nice people. Maybe they're really terrible people when they were alive, and now you're calling being like, hey, you guys are my ancestors, you're going to help me out with this thing, right? And they might be sitting there being like, well, I think your boss is terrible, so you should poison the water in the cooler at work. Terrible ideas like that. So your ancestors, you want to make sure that you're going to be contacting the ones who have your best interests at heart. You don't want just like, hey, everybody, come to my house. Let's hang out. You might have a couple ancestors who think you don't drink enough whiskey or something along those lines, without realizing that's not the best for you in the long run. There's a lot of different ways that you can form relationships with your ancestors. One of the things that ancestors really like, in fact, most spirits of people who have passed away, they really enjoy food and drink. They really miss it. It's really excellent. We don't know what we're missing out on, because food and being able to eat stuff is amazing. So a lot of traditions all over the world, and a lot of people I know who worship and revere their ancestors, what they do is when they have a meal, they'll set aside a little bit of that meal for their ancestors in a special place in their house. A lot of people will have, like, a photograph of their beloved people who have passed away, and it's easy to set up a little space where you can put, maybe your grandma just really loved tea with some cream and sugar, and so every now and then you can put a cup of tea with cream and sugar up next to her picture, so she will know that you're thinking about her and that you care about her. And that's also a way that we literally feed our ancestors, because as spirits, their energy is dissipating over time. Energy doesn't stay around forever, it dissipates over time. And by feeding our ancestors, by thinking about them, talking about them, and leaving them food offerings, things like that, we continue to nourish their spirits so they'll be more coherent. That helps out a lot when you're trying to get advice from your ancestors. It's always good when you can figure out what they're saying. And it also helps them stay around longer and be able to help you more. Also, it's great because the ancestors, a lot of times, are just hanging out and they're bored out of their, they're bored out of their ethereal forms, if you will, not their skulls. They're bored and they have very little to do. And so the idea of helping out, like, oh, my grandniece just contacted me with shamanism. She just asked for me to visit her in a dream. This is wonderful. I really miss her. And I guess a passed away ancestor, a lot of them are really excited to help out their descendants. Like, they're just thrilled to pieces to be able to do something that impacts your life in a positive way. In that way, they're some of the best spirits to work with because, one, they know what it's like to be human. They know what you need. And two, they actually care about you. They really want you to do well in life. There are some ancestors that they had such strict perspectives when they were alive that they no longer, even when they're deceased, they don't want anything to do with spirituality that doesn't fit into the belief system that they had when they were alive. So let's say that you had an ancestor who was practicing very conservative form of Christianity, and that ancestor, you go to contact them and they're like, "What are you doing? The Bible said to never do this. This is a terrible idea." Their belief system doesn't allow them to help you, and they're not the best person to, not the best spirit to help you out. On the flip side, though, it could have been that when they went from being your great-grandmother to being one of your ancestors, that they realized that they are just so bored that they really want to help you no matter what their belief system was when they were alive. So it's best to figure out what your ancestors are willing to help you with. I know somebody that she was so excited about the idea of working with her ancestors. She contacted one of her recent dead great aunt, and she was like, "I would really like your help with this thing." And her aunt was like, "I know some good biscuit recipes." And that was about it. That was, she's like, "I tried to work with my ancestors, but they helped with my cooking." Had some really good ideas about making biscuits, and that was about as far as it went. So sometimes the ancestors are really helpful, and then other times it's a very simple idea where they were really good at baking while they're alive. They're probably still really good at baking and have some really good ideas at what you could do with your baking. Which I think that's a really cute idea. I would totally contact ancestors to be like, "Hi, do you think I should use lard or butter?" So, we were talking about ways that you can honor and connect with your ancestors. Setting up an altar and having a designated space where you honor your ancestors is really helpful for them to have some place that they go back to on a regular basis. And also some place that if you leave food there or drink there, they know it belongs to them. There's other people I know who in their ancestor worship practice, what they do is they say, "Ancestors, please, come, join me while I eat." And they just offer up their own plate and they eat with the ancestors. Some traditions believe that if spirits eat your food, it takes away the nutritional value, and other traditions do not believe that. So it's up to you to make that choice for yourself. And mostly ancestors, what they're enjoying is that somebody thought of them and the smell of the food or the drink. That's the two things that really they enjoy. They can't eat it, technically. They're spirits. They don't actually consume the food. They just enjoy the smell and the fact that somebody thought of them. If you can remember their favorite foods, even better. That makes it even more awesome and helpful. For ancestors who are the greater dead, you can even look back through your own ethnic heritage and find the heroes in that heritage and worship them as ancestors. Like for me, that would be, I'm part Irish, so I would think of contacting like Cuchulainn, who was the Irish hound and fought in a lot of different wars and battles and was also a really good poet and a good singer. And I would set up a little altar space dedicated to him to worship him as an ancestor. He could help me out with things like martial arts, or if I was going to be writing some poetry and things along those lines. He could also help me find out more about what people who are Irish used to practice, what they were all about, because sometimes it's a little hard to find out more information about our ethnic background. So let's say that you've set up the altar. You got this little space designated to these different ancestors that you really appreciate, and they're wonderful people. And you want to contact them. You want them to have some way of imparting wisdom or advice to you. How does that happen? Do they just is it a voice in the back of your head? What's going on? It's sometimes a little bit interesting finding out what exactly or how exactly ancestors or other spirits impart their wisdom to us and give us advice and help. One of the good things to do is to define a way that ancestors can connect you. Like if you go to your altar and you say something like, "Great Grandma, please come and visit me in my dreams. I would really like some advice with interacting with my mom who's really upset." Things along those lines can help out a lot, because then the ancestors have an idea of okay, through dreams, got it. Or it also helps you out because then you know to pay attention to your dreams and see how your ancestors are talking to you through your dreams. It could be in symbols. It could be your great grandma just walks up to you in the dream and says, "Well, your mom has low blood sugar." Something along those lines. Or it seems like your mom is going through a really hard time because I went and checked up on her. You should ask her how she's doing. But with defining a way of communication with ancestors, that means that you know how they're going to communicate with you to listen in that situation, and your ancestors know to try and contact you that way. You can also ask their advice, ask the ancestors to give you advice through means of divination. Divination is like tarot cards or tea leaf reading, things along those lines. It does mean that you have to develop the skill of reading cards or tea leaves or even reading the clouds, things like that. Divination has a lot of different facets. And there are other times, too, where you can ask somebody who is proficient with divination and to help you get answers from your ancestors. That is usually very effective. Another way that you can get advice from your ancestors is sometimes you will just spend time in front of their altar with an idea, with a question, and the response will will come to your mind, like the inspiration will just come to your mind. And in that way, the ancestors also impart information to us is simply by pushing a thought in our direction, pushing an idea, and sort of whispering in our ears to help us out. So you can just put forward an idea while you're at their altar or say it out loud to their picture and ask a question or explain a situation and ask for advice. And there's a good chance that you will get advice from them at some point in time, even if it just seems like inspiration. Another way that you also have to build up a skill for is if you go into the spirit world with shamanism in order to contact your ancestors. And the great thing about going into the spirit world is you can go right to them, face to face, and say, "Hi, this is the problem I'm having. Can you help me out?" And spirit journeying is something that happens a lot with shamanism. Is one of the key foundations of shamanism is going into the spirit world to interact with spirits very directly in a very direct manner. And in the spirit world, ancestors are some of the best spirits that you can possibly interact with because they are looking out for your best interests. It's oftentimes a very good way of contacting like the greater dead too. It's also a great way of contacting the greater dead or the heroic dead, those people in your past, in your heritage, who are well known throughout history, who have done great and epic deeds, or amazing musicians or artists, wonderful creative people. If you go into the spirit world, it's a really good way of going to them. It's very helpful for them because in a lot of ways there's people saying, "Hey, you're like a celebrity of my heritage. Come to my place. Take your time and effort and come to my house." It's a little bit selfish. So if we go into the spirit world, we can go to them and make our request in person. And that, in a lot of ways, is more respectful and polite than to say, "Hey, you're awesome, come to my house." So, a lot of ways, being able to spirit journey and go into the spirit world is really helpful. So, like I stated at the beginning, my name is Seb. I run Green Stag Spirit Work. I have some papers out on these tables about courses that I have available online. I have a course that's on meditation, and it's absolutely free. It goes right to your email, and it's really good stuff. So I hear from reviews. And I also have another course that's about energy work, and the good news is that just went on sale if you guys are interested in it. So now it's only $25. I also have business cards out. I do spirit work in the area, and I'm going to be around for a little bit if you want to come and ask me some questions. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you all listening, and it's been excellent. I'm going to be here next month on the first Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. again, and I hope to see you guys all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Seb, for presenting that to us today. As mentioned, Seb will be here on the first Saturday of every month, so if you're interested in these topics, please check our calendar, and we are coordinating that on a monthly basis with the topic of the month, so we look forward to seeing you here next month. Thanks.